what have we been up to? For those of you who are familiar with Sabre, I think we all know Sabre is definitely a GDS, but we're a little bit more to that. We have 3 business units. The first is the GDS business, which is our travel network group. We have our airline solutions group. That's where I fall in. We have over 700 software products and solutions, as well as management consulting embedded. And then lastly, we have our hospitality group. So we do pretty much solutions, distribution for a lot of hotels, Wyndham, Sogo Sun, et cetera. I'm based in Johannesburg. Our head office is in Dallas, Texas, but we're a global company. And this is our customer portfolio. So the reason I mention this is because one of the great things that Sabre and even our competitors across the globe have is data, because we have customers all across the world. As you see, North America, Africa, Europe, Asia, we're able to leverage the data from our customers and use that to try to bring opportunities for either airports, airlines, and so forth. In Africa, this is our customer portfolio. So at the moment, our largest customer is Ethiopian Airlines. They have about 70 solutions and about 5 years of consulting that they've purchased from us to kind of help them with their strategy, as well as Comair Kalula. And our newest customer is FastJet. So FastJet has some of our tools and solutions. And I think the reason I mentioned that is because these carriers have really done a great job at investing in technology and data. And it's probably one of the drivers of the success for some of these carriers as well. And I'll show you an example with Ethiopian. We'll look at where they were in 2010 and where they are today in terms of revenue and growth. So airline data. So it's really three things that I think come up with data in Africa. The first thing that I always hear across boardroom tables or actually inside the airline or the airport space is it costs a lot of money. That data costs money. It's a cost item. It seems to not bring a return for me. So looking at the monetary investment of data is really important for your airline or your airport. And there's tons of data out there, tons of data that is helpful to enable your organization. The second thing is quality. So data, while it is there and it's definitely advancing into stages, I think in Africa we can all agree that the quality of data, it seems to be a challenge. If you don't have a solution, you tend to either get data from other parties or you tend to get it from the airport handling group or the civil aviation authorities, and it might not be apples to apples. It might be backdated. And as we all know, as we're sitting here today, right now, the industry is changing every second. New competitor can come in, new demand can swing one way or another. So quality of data is really tough here in Africa. And I'll talk about how Sabre's been able to enable quality of data through different channels, as well as the other suppliers out there. IATA has done a great job actually with PaxIS, who actually we feed a lot of their fares into Market Intelligence, our tool, because we are able to do a better job managing the data samples and bringing it to be more qualitative for airlines and airports. And then the last thing, which I think is one of the most important things, is skills. And the reason that is something I would like to mention is because it's one thing if you provide a customer, an airline or airport, with a data solution, do they have the skills to actually use it? I think about that and think about whether you're airport or airline or supplier, once you have that data, what do you do with it? Do you actually use it to just say, oh, here's the numbers and that looks interesting? Or do you do some thorough analysis to try to look for opportunities or to mitigate risk of some challenges that are there? And one thing that we see a lot is there's a massive gap with utilizing the data. And I will actually say some of our customers, unfortunately, they have these nice tools, they've invested, but the skills gap to actually use the data is quite wide. So I'll talk about that in terms of some of the best practices of what you would use data for. So the value form for data in terms of resources, right? So it's people, which we just talked about, making sure that the people in your organization understand how to use data accurately. What would they do to actually take this data and maximize revenue? Then you'll also look at the processes. So once you have that data, what is the process to tell a story? What is the process to create a strategy or create an air service development plan? And then the technology. Data now is quite robust. So are you investing in the right technology and tools? Best practices. So this is probably one of the takeaway slides I'd like you all to kind of hone in on, because it kind of shows at a high level, and I think we've already talked about this yesterday. I know Sabine did a great presentation on air service development and best practices of how you would use data in some fashions and forms. But I'd like to kind of walk you through just what you would probably use data for if you were to have a software tool that provides data and analytics. So a lot of times you'll use data for new route analysis. So we'll give an example. Ethiopian Airlines, they have been growing significantly, and we'll look at that growth in just a second. Raise your hand if you think that they just decide where to fly to because the sky is blue. Yeah. So I think we all know the answer to that. They don't, okay? So in order to look at a new route analysis, when they explore what should be our next destination, they have invested in data tools that provide them with what is the opportunity for us. Is that new market growing? Is it shrinking? Is the traffic robust? What has been the trends over the last 5 to 10 years? What are the average fares? Is the market being stimulated by other competitors, et cetera? So you'll use data to look at new route analysis. And let me mention another thing is you gotta use data as a guide. No data is perfect. I think we tend to get into we tend to look at numbers, and obviously numbers tell a lot, but with data, you have to understand it's just a guide. And it doesn't matter if it's Sabre data or data that you got from someone else. It's a guide to help lead you to something else. Outside-in analysis. So that's, say that you are a airline and you want to figure out what another competitor is doing or a competitive strategy. Outside analysis is a perfect way to kind of dip into what is your competitor up to and what are the weaknesses that you can try to impede on that competitor to either reduce their revenue maximization and take market share. So we'll show you some examples of that as well. Scheduled connectivity. So I think we're all here at this conference to talk about connectivity. Data is out there. OAG is actually one of our partners, so they feed a lot of data into our Sabre tool. And what that schedule data does, it allows you to look at the scheduling opportunities if you were to connect a code share from one African airline to another. Or if you're an airport and you're trying to bring more air service, you can do some analysis and look at the scheduling to pitch to an airport and say, look, if you add these new destinations, you can potentially increase connectivity or increase some type of traffic flows in that actual airport. So scheduled connectivity, big, and it's something that you should be using with regards to data. And then I just mentioned attracting new airlines. So I think we all know that data is powerful. I'm former airline, so I remember coming to these conferences and airports would always pitch their story to me of why Southwest Airlines should fly to a certain destination or why Eric Air should fly to a new regional destination at the time. And the stories were quite nice and compelling. But I'll be honest, I wanted to see the data and I wanted to see something that I already did not know. And that's what data enables you to do. I think that's the biggest takeaway is being able to tell the story to the airlines of something that is tangible, something that has results, and something that has numbers to it. How are we doing? Okay, good. Just making sure. So today, in terms of what's happening in our industry, right? So there's a lot of transformation going on. So first, I think you'll see that without data and without digging into data and data analytics, there's missed opportunities for revenue, and there's also missed opportunities for profitability enhancement. So if you are a carrier that is probably going through some tough times, I think we've already mentioned that this is the only region that is not currently making a profit. Well, data is going to help enable you to drive profitability to another level, or at least move the needle in some ways. Also, there's a lack of insight into the comprehensive market data, right? So you might have this data again, but if you double click, what does that mean? So if you see that there's a bunch of traffic that's coming from a certain point, is it because of an event? Is it because of holidays? Is it because of, a new hotel is now opened up, so therefore, passengers are now deciding to go to this resort? Is it because, trader traffic, for example, conferences and conventions? So there's obviously a lack of insight, and so it's important to interpret that data real accurately. And then the last thing, technology, a single reliable source of global O&D data. So what that means is we've been able to create a tool that enables you to see the world. So this tool is called Global Demand Data. And you are able to see what is happening in different parts of the world with regards to airlines, traffic, fares, schedules, load factor, and so forth. The industry is transforming towards that. Now you can look at certain items on your phone and know exactly how much load factor is on the aircraft that landed just a few hours ago. That technology is there. You don't have to wait till the end of the month or next quarter to figure out those results. The reason I'm mentioning that is because that's a competitive edge to your airline or your airport, is to have that data and insights. So here's something that our team did, and you might have seen this slide. It's floated around quite a bit, but if you ask yourself, how much revenue is on the table in Africa, okay? I probably should have asked that question, but it's already up there. But you can see how much revenue is actually on the table right now in terms of Africa. So this is inbound traffic, both international and intra-Africa as well. So it's inclusive of Emirates, Turkish, but also all the intra-Africa stuff that Ethiopian, Kenya Airways, so forth. I always like to ask our airline customers and our airline CEOs this question, and I'll be honest, 90% of the time they have no idea. They have no idea how much revenue opportunity is actually on their table, and the airports as well don't realize how much revenue opportunity is on the table to capture. Only 20% of African carriers are taking advantage of that revenue, of the 50 billion. However, it gives some insight into your opportunity pool. And without knowing, the only way to find this is if you have accurate data. Okay, and so that's kind of the foundation that can start to dig in. Now you see this chart kind of has the top 20 carriers across the region by size. This gives a glimpse who's growing, who's shrinking, so forth. This is the stuff that global carriers and airports are doing regularly every week inside their head offices, doing this type of competitive analysis. What we're finding is that there's a lack of this type of best practices that are being done here in the region. And so it's important to expose the community to make sure that we're doing these type of studies and we're doing this type of analysis with our airports and airlines. When it comes to the airlines, so I think we mentioned maximizing revenue. So this is kind of the boardroom table if you were in a commercial organization. So imagine yourself as an airline. You are the CEO. And you have a CCO, and your CCO has these departments, okay? CCO has revenue management, has pricing, network planning, scheduling, loyalty, marketing. All of those groups come together to do one thing, and that's maximizing revenue. That is their main KPI across the entire commercial organization, is to maximize revenue. Well, in order to maximize revenue, you need data. You need to understand where you are today, where you want to go, and what your competitors are doing today and where they want to go. So it's important from a commercial perspective that data is invested so that all these different entities in the airline organization can see how they can drive, push drivers to maximize revenue. Now, step into the airport side. When I told you the story about trying to tell your story and pitch to airlines to come to your airport, you want to tell this story of how air service to your airport is going to maximize revenue across all these different areas. So that's kind of the bridge of the gap, right? From an airport side, you're using data to say, hey, Ethiopian, or hey, Rwanda Air, if you fly to my destination, we have this data that we've dug into, and XYZ is going to hopefully fuel maximization of revenue across not just network planning, but revenue management, pricing, scheduling, and so forth. So I have two more slides, and then we'll go into the demo and just some questions if we have time. So this was an analysis that we did for, this is the outside-in analysis, by the way. And we do this all the time for our airline customers all over the world. It's kind of the, hey, we know nothing about your airline, but we have data, and we're able to take that data and show you that there's opportunities for improvement in your business and your organization. That's really what this is. So our team does this very quickly. We pull the data, and this was a Chinese carrier. This was, I think, it was Junya Airlines. They're like a hybrid carrier out of Shanghai, and pretty big airline. And what we did was we walked in there and we said, Junya, do you realize that in some of your markets, you're charging 55% lower than your competitors? And they were shocked. You know, because sometimes when you're running an airline, you're just in operational mode. You're just trying to make sure things run smoothly. But from a commercial perspective and from a data perspective, we were able to look into their business and pinpoint markets where they could have increased the fare by 5% from where they are. So if that 55% on Bangkok to Shanghai, which is that big one there that's at the negative 55%, if it shifted to 50, the improvement in revenue would have been substantial. It looks like it's, in total, it's about 17.1 million per annum. So if they were just to increase their fares by 5%, they would have gotten a bit more revenue in their pocket into their bottom line. This is the type of stuff that airlines should be doing continuously to use data, and also airports should be also doing these type of analysis to talk to the airlines about fares, yields, and opportunity for improvement in traffic. Now, and this was just kind of a double click in terms of that specific market. And John mentioned that you guys will definitely get a copy of all this, so you'll be able to kind of look at some of these numbers and details. This is an interesting slide. So is anybody familiar with a yield curve? Raise your hand. Okay, excellent. So that's great. So I think we've seen this before, and if you're an airline, you should be using this probably every day. But there's data out there where you can actually look at the yield versus the distance of your markets and pinpoint which markets or opportunities that are above the curve and which markets below the curve that might be some weaknesses where you want to try to move or shift to another area. I think from an airport perspective, it gives you some, when you're talking to airlines, it gives perspective to say, hey, these are high-yielding markets that you might want to start, and it gives further justification to start service. From an airline perspective, you're now going to double-click on some of the weaknesses to find out, hey, what's wrong? Why are the yields so low? And last thing I have here is seasonality. I think we know seasonality is a very important factor of our day-to-day business, whether it's an airport because you're expecting capacity levels at different parts of the year, or if you're an airline trying to manage that capacity throughout the year. So this is Bangkok, Shanghai, and using the data, we're able to find out throughout 12 months where the seasonality dips are, where's the passengers coming, which months. So it gives some further justification when to add capacity, when to upgauge to a different aircraft. Even from a long-haul perspective, which months should we be flying some of the long-haul flights during which seasons. All this is used from data. And that's why it's so important that airlines and airports invest in data to be able to do some of these best practices. How are we doing? Okay, excellent. One exercise that I will mention is Ethiopian Airlines. Does anybody know in 2010 how much revenue Ethiopian Airlines generated? I'll take two guesses. 200 million? Okay. And anybody from this side? 220 million. Okay. Interesting. So they were actually at about $1 billion US, okay, in 2010. So quite sizable, right? Okay. Anybody know how much revenue they are today? 6, kind of high, but they're actually 2.9 billion, okay? So if you think in 7 years how much they've done and how much they've grown, it's been quite interesting, right? So, and that's what I was going to show was kind of an example of how they got to that growth, all the capacity that was grown amongst that time, all the destinations that were added, and so forth. Now, if you are, and I'm not going to say any names, but if you're a competitor with Ethiopian Airlines and you had data, what is something that you would use to try to either take some of that revenue share from them or compete with them more effectively? Anybody?
Come on, don't be shy.
Sorry, you asked if they're making money? Well, it depends. Well, that's another question. But if you had data, what would you do to try to compete with them? What type of analysis would you might want to do if you're an airline?
Let me ask Ian, because Ian's ex-CCO of Air Djibouti and Sri Lankan Airlines. So let's ask Ian.
I'd want to see their highest passenger number O&Ds.
Okay.
I would like to look at their highest yielding routes. And also I would look at better connectivity to make faster journey times.
Excellent. Looks like Atatawali needs to hire you as an advisor. No, excellent. I don't know if you guys heard that, but you said looking at some top O&Ds, looking at the high-yielding routes, and looking at connectivity. But in order to do that, as a competitor to Ethiopian Airlines, you need data. So it's important that that data is at your fingertips in order to enable that type of research and that type of market intelligence. And then from an airport perspective, I'll ask just one more question. If you are being challenged by your CEO to bring more air service development to your airport, what would you do in terms of using data? What type of analysis would you use to try to poach some more air service development to your airport?
Look at the costs of operating to the airports and see what incentives the airport could give me as an airline to encourage me to come there.
Yep, absolutely. So looking at costs of other airports, trying to do a value proposition, right, from a cost perspective, and then perhaps on a revenue perspective, looking at, it's kind of the similar exercises we did for ET, top markets, high-yielding ones, fares, so everything across that commercial table. Excellent. So thank you guys for the time. Sorry about the live demonstration. And I'll be around the rest of this afternoon, and thank you again. Appreciate it.